Late 1944, Berlin Wilhelmstrasse, Ministry of Armaments and War Production. Albert Speer sits alone beneath weak ceiling lamps, while air raid sirens wail in the distance. A thin folder rests open on the desk. Inside lies the latest intelligence summary. United States aircraft factories delivered approximately 96,000 military aircraft during 1944. German factories managed roughly 40,000 in the same period. The gap exceeds 2-to-1 against a single enemy nation. No voices interrupt the silence of the office. Speer stares at the page until the numbers burn behind his eyes. The war has become a contest of production lines stretching across an entire continent. He understands in that moment that Germany entered an industrial battle it cannot win. The number that matters is 96,000 aircraft built in 12 months by one adversary whose resources remain untouched by war. 1939 Berlin Reich Chancellery and Wolfschanze headquarters in East Prussia. Adolf Hitler and the General Staff design campaigns, meant to end in 6 weeks. France falls in 46 days, Poland in 28. Every plan rests on the same premise: rapid victory before the enemy can mobilize industry. German leaders believe technical excellence of a few thousand tanks and aircraft will always defeat mere quantity. The Luftwaffe begins the war with fewer than 4,000 modern combat aircraft. Reserves remain small because prolonged conflict is unthinkable. Britain survives the Battle of Britain yet stands alone. The Soviet Union appears backward, its factories primitive. No contingency exists for war against the United States, whose industrial capacity is dismissed as sluggish and remote. Neutral America sells raw materials to Germany until 1941. When Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war the same week. The decision is greeted with confidence. No one recalculates production requirements. February 1942, 8 days after Fritz Todt dies in an aircraft explosion at Rastenburg. Hitler summons Albert Speer, until then chiefly the Führer's favorite architect, and appoints him Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production at age 36. Speer inherits a chaos of competing agencies, private firms, Gauleiter fiefdoms, and military procurement offices. No central plan governs steel allocation or machine tools. Aircraft programs multiply into dozens of overlapping types. Submarines, tanks, and artillery each fight for the same scarce resources. The Wehrmacht already occupies 500,000 men on the Eastern Front, another 250,000 in North Africa and Western garrisons. Raw material imports from the Soviet Union have ceased. Neutral Sweden and Spain supply iron ore on shrinking credit. The Reichsbahn struggles to move coal across bombed marshalling yards. British and Soviet factories work 3 shifts while many German plants still close Saturday afternoon. Speer begins by demanding authority over every weapon from rifles to bombers. He creates the Central Planning Board with field marshals and industrialists forced to sit at one table. Steel quotas, coal quotas, and labor quotas are argued in weekly shouting matches. Yet even with new powers, the fundamental arithmetic does not change. American shipyards launch Liberty ships faster than U-boats can sink them. Soviet tank plants beyond the Urals produce 300 T-34 each month, while German factories struggle to repair damaged Panthers. British bombers appear nightly over the Ruhr. The Reich enters 1943 fighting 3 major industrial powers whose combined population and resources exceed Germany and occupied Europe by margins measured in continents. Inside the ministry corridors, the 96,000 American aircraft of 1944 remain theoretical, a projection built from captured magazines, neutral attaché reports, and intercepted radio traffic. No one yet believes the number possible. Speer himself tours American-style assembly methods only in imagination. The assumption that short war makes mass production unnecessary has hardened into doctrine. Every month, the front lines lengthen, while the resource base shrinks. The 96,000 aircraft are still 2 years away, but the industrial foundations that will make them inevitable are already laid across the Atlantic, untouched by war, fed by oceans of oil and mountains of aluminum that Germany can only dream of possessing. The war Germany prepared to fight no longer exists. 1941, Detroit Willow Run, a factory so large that clouds form beneath its roof. Ford engineers adapt automobile methods to four-engine bombers. Conveyor belts 1 mile long move B-24 Liberators forward at walking speed. Fuselages arrive from San Diego, engines from Chicago, wings from Tulsa. A complete heavy bomber rolls out every 63 minutes by late 1943. In 1941, the entire United States delivered about 26,000 military aircraft. In 1942, the total reaches 48,000. 1943 yields about 86,000. 1944 peaks at about 96,300 accepted military aircraft. The 96,000 aircraft represent one new warplane completed every 5.5 minutes around the clock for 12 months. Seattle builds B-17 at Boeing Plant 2. Los Angeles produces B-29 at 4 separate factories linked by railway. Farmingdale on Long Island turns out P-47 Thunderbolts at the rate of 20 per day. Inglewood assembles P-38 twins faster than the Luftwaffe can shoot them down. North American Aviation at Dallas and Inglewood delivers P-51 Mustangs fitted with Merlin engines, giving range of 1,900 statute miles with drop tanks. A single pilot can now escort bombers from England to Berlin and fight for 40 minutes over the target before returning. 8th Air Force, based in England, grows to more than 2,000 heavy bombers by summer 1944. 15th Air Force in Italy adds another 1,400. Carrier task forces in the Pacific operate 15 large fleet carriers, each with 90 aircraft plus 20 light carriers. The United States Navy accepts more than 28,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. German intelligence tracks the avalanche through neutral sources. Swiss military attachés visit American factories and report openly. Swedish ball-bearing salesmen return with photographs of endless assembly lines. Abwehr agents in Mexico read Aviation Week magazine. Speer receives monthly summaries from the statistical department of the Reich Air Ministry. Each page adds another 10,000 aircraft to the enemy total. Luftwaffe liaison officers at the ministry watch the same reports arrive and leave the room without comment. No one challenges the figures because the sky over Germany confirms them. By spring 1944, American bombers appear in formations of 1,000 or more, escorted by 800 long-range fighters. Flak and day fighters knock down fewer than 30 bombers per raid while losing 120 German pilots. The 96,000 aircraft of 1944 are no longer numbers on paper. They are the silver specks that fill the horizon from 25,000 feet and blot out the sun over every German city. The constraint was never raw material or labor. The constraint was only the decision to begin. Once that decision was made, the factories never stopped. 1942 Dessau Junkers plant midnight shift. Albert Speer walks the line unannounced between rows of women in grey smocks riveting Ju-88 fuselages. He stops at Station 14, where a Ukrainian girl no older than 18 hammers with hands wrapped in rags. Output per shift has risen 30%, since he ordered removal of ornamental curves from the tail. Every gram saved becomes another aircraft. He signs the nightly report and boards the train south. Next morning, Wiener Neustadt Messerschmitt plant underground galleries carved into the hillside after bombing began. Concentration camp prisoners in striped uniforms push wing assemblies on rollers while SS guards count minutes. Speer demands longer jigs so that Bf 109 wings need only one setup instead of 7. Monthly acceptance rises from 400 to 1,800 single-engine fighters within 18 months. He does not linger near the prisoners. 1943 Augsburg New Assembly Hall lit by bare bulbs. Engineers present charts showing that reducing aircraft types from 42 to 9 would double output. Speer forces the Luftwaffe Technical Office to accept the plan. He creates the Jägerstab in March 1944 with absolute priority over steel, aluminum and labor. Karl Otto Sauer runs daily meetings that last until dawn. Factory managers who miss targets receive telephone calls from Sauer at 3 in the morning. Total aircraft production climbs to 3,050 in September 1944. Yet each visit reveals the same cracks. Railway sidings stand empty of coal. Electric power drops 20% during peak hours. Skilled German fitters have gone to the front, their places taken by French prisoners who sabotage when guards look away. Night after night, Speer returns to Berlin, Pariser Platz apartment, and opens the locked drawer. Inside lie the American figures, 96,000 aircraft in 1944. He compares them to German 40,000 and feels the room grow colder. He writes memoranda describing the American economy as a single, coordinated organism, while German industry remains divided into feudal kingdoms. He orders more prisoners transferred from Auschwitz to Mittelwerk, where V-2 rockets take shape in tunnels. He signs the transport lists himself. In meetings with Hitler, he still speaks of final victory through higher output and new weapons. Alone, he calculates how many months remain before the Allied production wave breaks over the Reich completely. The constraint is no longer machine tools. The constraint is aviation fuel reduced to only a small fraction of the tonnage the Luftwaffe once calculated as necessary for sustained operations. Newly finished fighters sit wingtip to wingtip on fields without petrol or pilots. Speer drives past one such field near Leipzig and counts 400 brand-new W-190, waiting for engines that will never arrive because ball bearings come from bombed Schweinfurt. He tells no one what he sees. The 96,000 American aircraft cast their shadow even when the sky is clear. Spring 1944, Reich Air Ministry basement fluorescent lights hum over tables covered with graphs. The Jägerstab reports single-engine fighter production reached 2,250 in July and 3,050 in September. Total aircraft acceptance for the entire year will close at 39,827 machines. On paper, the armaments miracle has arrived. Assembly halls work 72-hour weeks. Women and prisoners push rivet guns until fingers bleed. Yet outside the windows, American bombers fly past in perfect formation at 26,000 feet. The same month fighter output peaks, aviation fuel delivery falls to a small fraction of what the Luftwaffe once calculated as its monthly requirement for sustained operations. Newly built aircraft stand idle on every airfield, from Java to Wiener Neustadt. May 1944. The combined bomber offensive shifts target from aircraft factories to synthetic oil plants. Leuna loses 70% of output in a single week. Politz burns for 3 days. By late 1944, monthly fuel production has fallen to a small fraction of its pre-raid level. Pilots receive 1 hour of training flight per month instead of 40. Operational readiness of day fighter units falls below 30%. Luftwaffe commanders order aircraft dispersed into forests and autobahns, where mechanics service engines with hand pumps. Allied intelligence photographs show hundreds of fighters hidden under camouflage nets motionless for lack of petrol. Transportation collapses next. October 1944. American and British bombers strike marshalling yards and bridges. Coal trains take 14 days to travel 300 miles. Aluminum ingots pile up at Hamburg docks while Augsburg factories shut down for want of metal. The 96,000 American aircraft of 1944 face a Luftwaffe that can barely put 1,000 fighters aloft on any given day. Each American raid now costs the defenders more pilots than it can replace. A single group loses 30 experienced flight leaders in 6 weeks over the Reich. Replacements arrive from training schools with 20 hours on type. Underground factories offer no salvation. At its peak, Mittelwerk produces roughly 600 to 700 V-2 rockets monthly, using tens of thousands of concentration camp workers. Yet every rocket requires the aluminum of 3 fighter aircraft for the same warhead. Effect. Nordhausen tunnels echo with hammering while the surface sky belongs to P-51, groups sweeping at 450 miles per hour. In key armaments, sectors foreign and forced labor makes up a very large share of the workforce, often approaching or exceeding half in some plants by winter. Prisoners too weak to stand are carried away each dawn. Output rises on the acceptance sheets while combat strength melts. The constraint was never the number of airframes completed. The constraint was the fuel to fly them and the pilots to fight them. October 1944. Berlin Wilhelmstrasse second-floor office, stripped of carpet because the Reichsbahn can no longer deliver coal for heating. Albert Speer dictates a 37-page memorandum to a secretary whose hands shake from cold. The document states plainly that final victory through conventional arms is impossible. Production will collapse completely between April and July 1945. Allied bombing has reduced oil transportation and electricity to a fraction of the levels the regime once considered necessary to continue the war. Even the new electro-submarines and jet fighters cannot alter arithmetic measured in continents. He seals the envelope and sends it to Hitler at Wolfschanz. The Führer refuses to read past page 2. November 1944 East Prussia Midnight Conference in the map room. Speer stands beside the table while Hitler rants about miracle weapons and the will to resist. Speer promises another 20% increase in fighter output for 1945. He knows the promise is hollow. The 96,000 American aircraft of the current year already outnumber every German aircraft built since 1939. He watches Hitler trace new defensive lines on the map and says nothing. Later, he orders key machine tools buried in salt mines and tells factory managers to hide spare parts against the coming occupation. January 1945, the Oder Front Speer drives east through snow in an open Kübelwagen. Russian artillery flashes on the horizon. He visits a fighter wing equipped with the newest FW-190D9. Only 11 machines are flyable for want of spark plugs. The wing commander salutes and reports that American Mustangs appeared yesterday at 30,000 feet and shot down 4 aircraft without loss. Speer nods and drives on. That night later, he would say that the war had in truth been lost once America entered with its untouched industry. He still signs orders, sending 16-year-old boys to flak batteries and prisoners to new underground factories. February 1945, Berlin again. Speer convenes the Jägerstab for the last time. He announces that all future effort must preserve industrial installations for the post-war period. No one asks which post-war period he means. Outside, red glows rise above the city as phosphorus canisters burn through ruined roofs. The 96,000 aircraft have become daily reality in the form of vast bomber streams escorted by swarms of fighters on every clear day over Germany. Speer looks up through the shattered skylight and sees the condensation trails crossing in perfect grids. He understands that the production battle ended long before the fighting on the ground. The mask of the efficient technocrat remains in place until the final curtain. 1946, Nuremberg Palace of Justice, Courtroom 600. Albert Speer stands in the dock between Karl Dönitz and Konstantin von Neurath. The prosecution presents transport lists bearing his signature that moved 140,000 concentration camp prisoners to armaments factories in 1944 alone. He accepts collective responsibility for the system he directed, yet denies personal knowledge of the extermination camps. The tribunal sentences him to 20 years imprisonment for war crimes and crimes against humanity, chiefly for the exploitation of slave labor that made possible the late rise in aircraft production. He serves the full term in Spandau prison, released September 1966. Historians after 1970 dismantle the armaments miracle he once claimed. Total German aircraft output from 1942 through 1944 reaches on the order of 80 to 90,000 machines. Across those same years, the United States delivered about 230,000 military aircraft, with about 96,300 in 1944 itself. Allied bombing destroyed only a limited share of German machine tools, yet cut oil output and transportation capacity to a small fraction of pre-war levels. The decisive imbalance was never repaired by longer shifts or underground halls. American factories operated untouched while German plants burned. 1981 London hotel room. Speer dies of a stroke while preparing another television interview. In his last manuscripts, he still insists he recognized the inevitability of defeat earlier than any other leader, pointing to American industrial capacity and its wartime aircraft output as proof that Germany could not win. Readers note that he continued to increase forced labor quotas and disperse factories until April 1945. The 96,000 aircraft of 1944 remain the single clearest metric industrial historians use when explaining why the European war ended when and how it did. Long after the last B-17 is scrapped and the last Mi-262 rusts in a museum, the figure endures. It stands for the moment, One man inside the German war economy looked across the Atlantic, saw an entire continent turned into one continuous assembly line, and understood that no amount of rationalization, no midnight shift of prisoners, the promise of jet fighters could close a gap measured not in thousands but in oceans of steel and rivers of oil. The war on the ground lasted another year. The production war was over the day the 96,000 aircraft became fact.